Welcome back to Inside City Hall. As you heard just before the break, state lawmakers returned to Albany this week for the start of what is shaping up to be a busy session. One of the major issues on everyone's mind seems to be whether to make any changes to the newly enacted bail reform. Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie has not publicly expressed any willingness to make changes, while Governor Cuomo, Mayor de Blasio, and State Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins have been open to it. Joining me now to talk more about this is the Senate Deputy Majority Leader, Queens State Senator Michael Gianaris. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Bobby.
So first, let's talk about the new environment in Albany. Last year, there was a new Democratic majority. You guys got a whole bunch of progressive legislation done, voting reform, rent reform, a whole laundry list of stuff. Now, we're looking at a $6 billion state budget hole. And the big talk in Albany seems to be rolling back one of the major reforms you guys passed last year. So how are things going to be different this time around?
Well, I think what you're going to see this year is a continued emphasis on the progress we started making last year. 2019 will go down in the state's history as one of the most productive sessions that ever happened. Almost 1,000 pieces of legislation passed both houses. Nothing like that has happened in recent memory. And it's because we have now the largest Democratic majority in over a century here in New York State. We started this week the same way we started last year, by trying to improve our democracy and make our elections work better. We learned some things from early voting, which is one of the great changes we made last year. So we passed some tweaks to that law that we established last year. But we also did a bill of mine that I'm very proud of, automatic voter registration, which is going to help some of the 1 to 2 million New Yorkers who are eligible voters yet not on the rolls get registered. So we're now the 17th state that's moving in that direction. Hopefully the Assembly will pass it soon, and we'll see that become law.
So explain how that works a little bit, automatic voter registration. One of the concerns with it last time around was that it would allow non-citizens to vote. So is that the case? How does this going to work exactly?
It never was going to allow non-citizens to vote. No one was changing the laws that related to that. There was an instruction that tells people how to avoid registering, and because of a typographical error, it instructed them to do the opposite. But it was never the case that anyone was going to allow the non-citizens to vote. We fixed that error, and we also made it clearer by having the agencies responsible, the Department of Motor Vehicles and the Department of Health, bear the onus now of not transmitting to the Board of Elections registration forms for people who are not eligible, because those agencies do have the information about whether someone's a citizen or not, or of age or not. So now we're saying it's not just up to the person filling out the form, but the agency itself has to know that if it's not someone who's an eligible voter, not to pass that information to the Board of Elections.
But what does automatic mean? It's any time you have an interaction with a state agency?
With those two agencies in particular, for starters, the Department of Motor Vehicles and the Department of Health, because those are the best equipped to handle this, and a number of the other states have taken that approach as well. Anytime you go in there and you fill out a form for a driver's license renewal, change of address, or availing yourself of services through the Department of Health, that the same exact form that you're using to apply for those services will just contain all the information the Board of Elections might need, and then the agency involved will, after checking to make sure you're eligible, pass that on to the board, and you will be registered automatically. So nothing needs to be done by the applicant other than the same form they're filling out for purposes of getting services from the state agencies.
All right, so that was the first order of business in the state Senate when you guys returned to session this week. Let's talk about bail reform, which is another pressing and very contentious issue. This is something that was passed last year. It eliminates cash bail in a lot of crimes, misdemeanor crimes, nonviolent crimes. Then there was this huge pushback these last couple of months because of concerns this was going to put dangerous criminals back out on the street. Now, even some of your fellow Democrats are in favor of rolling back some of the provisions in the law, or tweaking it in some way. So is that a mistake? Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, look, this law has been in effect for all of 10 days at this point. When there was hundreds of years of a grossly unfair system, the bail system that existed, there was no urgency to help the people who were being unfairly detained and imprisoned because they were simply too poor to pay for their bail. Where was the outcry then? And never mind the fact that that old system allowed people who were incredibly dangerous back in the community every day, as long as they had the money to pay for it. Harvey Weinstein's on trial now for awful sexual assault, rape allegations. There are others that he's not even charged with. And he's been home. I've been reading in the newspapers about him at comedy clubs and having a great time while he's waiting for his trial to begin. Where's the outrage about that? But somehow when it's someone who's too poor to pay, when it's someone who can't afford it, we want them locked up. And that was a horrible system that ruined lives. Khalif Browder's the most well-known one. The poor young man was in jail for over 3 years waiting for trial. What charges were eventually dropped. His life was destroyed and ended up taking his own life. There are countless stories like that are now being avoided. For every story we read about in the press that raises people's concerns or is sensationalized, there are dozens of people who are accused of very low-level crimes who are now home, get to keep their jobs, get to avoid going through the cycle of the criminal justice system. That's not only bad for them, but bad for the overall community. Because when we destabilize those lives, people are more likely to be recidivists if, in fact, they committed the crime they were accused of. And that makes the general community less safe. So,
what about this idea, though, this tweak of giving judges more discretion and they can decide whether there's some risk to public safety by a defendant being out on the street? What's wrong with giving the judges more leeway?
If implemented unfairly, right, a lot of the problem with the bail system as it was is that the bails were being set artificially high with the knowledge that the person accused couldn't afford it. So it was de facto a way to detain people, even though theoretically they could get out if they could pay. But if someone knows that you can't pay, then you go in. So what we don't want to do is just substitute something else that's unfair for the unfair money bail system. And if a standard of assessing dangerousness is applied unfairly, you're once again going to have young people of color who are detained at a far greater rate than is justified, and in a way that's unfair relative to their actual risk to the community. Now, let me remind everyone, too, we're talking about pre-trial. There's this huge discussion. It's a very easily demagogued issue, unfortunately, and it's easy to spread fear around it, and that's what's been happening. But these are people who have not been convicted of the crime they've been accused. We grow up in school and we learn that the presumption of innocence is one of the great hallmarks of our legal system and our criminal justice system. But in fact, you're supposed to be innocent unless proven guilty. In practice, it was you're guilty unless proven rich, because if you didn't have a checkbook, you couldn't get out. And what we don't want to do is then substitute a dangerousness standard that might be applied unfairly as well and end up detaining more people than would be justified.
Not a lot of time left, but quickly, I wanted to have you talk about another thing that you want to take up, which is subsidy programs. Amazon was going to get hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies and tax breaks. You want to do away with those programs?
Well, we certainly need to reform them. I think you're talking about the ICAP and REAP programs. They were the city-based programs that existed as of right. So just by appearing here and locating in the right place, Amazon was planning to avail themselves of over $1 billion in benefits. I think at a minimum we need to talk about capping those programs so no individual project can take that much of public subsidy as part of their program. Look, these programs have been around a long time. They constantly need evaluation. We learned a lot from the mistakes made in the Amazon application and the gross subsidy package they were offered. We now see they're coming to New York anyway, so that is something that obviously wasn't necessary to get them here. And we have the advantage of those programs expiring, which gives us an opportunity to review them and get it right going forward.
Before I let you go, are you endorsing or have any thoughts on the Queensborough president's race?
I know all of the candidates, and I'm trying to figure out what to do. Two of them are ones that overlap with my Senate district, so I work with them extremely closely. Both Councilman Van Bramer and Councilman Constantinides are not only colleagues but friends, and so I'm trying to figure out what to do. We still have a couple of months before Election Day.
All right. Senator Mike Gianaris, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Bobby.
All right. It is time now for a break. Coming up, we will talk more about the debate over bail reform and the rest of the week's top stories when I'm joined by our Friday Reporters Roundtable. Stay with us.